Let me introduce myself. So I'm Andy Jones. I'm currently a lecturer in cybersecurity for a UK university. I have been the CISO for Unilever. I've been the CISO for Sainsbury's Supermarkets. I've worked as a security researcher. I've worked as a technical security person for an airline. But why am I here? I'm here because I was a CISO for Maersk Line at the time of the 2017 cybersecurity attack. So I'm going to talk to you about that attack. I'm going to cover some technical aspects. I'm going to cover some people aspects. But I really want to give you a sense of what it's like to have a major cyber attack in a big corporate, because it's different. So I need to set the stage with Maersk. Probably for this audience, I don't need to too much stage setting of Maersk, but I want to put it in context. So at the time, 2017, Maersk was a big multinational with 9 separate business units. It was an oil producer. It had rigs. It had ships. It had ports. A huge company. It had an airline. It used to have 2. Still got the airline. But it was that huge sort of company. And if you're Danish, there are 2 companies you want to work for. One of them is Lego, the other is Maersk. So Maersk is very Danish. It's based in Copenhagen. But one of the troubles we had was actually finding enough IT staff in Denmark. So we opened an offshoot of Maersk in the UK. And I was employee number 3 in the UK. So the IT hub was in the UK, fairly close to Heathrow. Maersk ships 15% of world trade, has about 700 or 800 ships, big ships. It owns about 75 ports, and we'll talk more about those as we go through the presentation. So it's the 27th of June. I'm actually with my team, my leadership team, my security function leadership team, at an off-site meeting in a hotel about 5 miles from Maidenhead, which is the UK IT hub. And we're discussing the strategy for next year. And it's coming up to about 11 o'clock, and people are starting to get a bit hungry. So the sandwiches are coming in, and we're taking a little break, and people are checking their email. So we're just chatting a bit, and then somebody says, "Andy, my laptop's failing." And we say, "Well, that's because there's an idiot using it." And we laugh. And then somebody else says, "Andy, my laptop's failing." And we giggle a bit. And then the 3rd person, and the 4th person, and the 5th person. And then the phones go off. And I go back to my car. I drive in my car the 5 miles back to Maidenhead to the IT HQ. That takes me 15 minutes. In that 15 minutes, Maersk lost everything in 60 countries. All the IT in 60 countries, dead as a donut. Within an hour, it had lost everything in 110 countries. And when I say lost everything, it was certainly like the internet had not been invented. The network was down. 2.5 systems across 9 major businesses, oil producers, were down. The photocopiers had stopped working. The physical phone systems for the head offices, of course they were on Windows infrastructure, had stopped working. You could not phone Maersk. Everything had stopped. A $50 billion company stopped dead in the water in actually 6 minutes. And it was a new facility in Maidenhead. It was a lovely facility. We had a crisis room. So we sat in a crisis room. And we looked at each other and said, is it just us? Or is everybody in the UK or the world sitting in a crisis room saying, what just happened? And for that moment, we didn't actually know. So quite quickly, somebody managed to get on Twitter and saw some other companies showing the same sort of thing that we were seeing. So we knew quite quickly it wasn't just us. And we looked outside the window, and people were still shopping. So we thought, well, it's not everybody. But that's how it feels. Nothing was working. The office was quiet. When the IT is not working, the office is very quiet. And what did we see? We saw a lot of that. We saw that on pretty much every device. We estimated quite quickly that 80% of our devices, and we had 50,000, were showing that. Actually, that's not quite technically true. If you had an encrypted laptop, it didn't show you that. But if you had a desktop, it did. But effectively, it was trying to show you that. That's what we saw. And that's all we knew. All we knew is that, and nothing worked. In 6 minutes. We had some sort of clues, and this just gives a sense of the messiness of an incident. We had some clues. For about 11:15 before it really hit, we'd had some reports from South Africa that people were having PC and laptop problems. But quite quickly, it was clear this was a crisis. Now, Maersk loves the crisis. It's one of these companies that really likes to demonstrate how it works in a crisis. But their crisis procedures were all about ships running aground, or oil leaks, or oil spills, and things like that. So this was alien to it. The IT site had pretty much gone down. We had some suggestion that the global users were affected, but about 12:30, it was game over. We sort of disconnected the main data centers, whatever that means, and we'll come back to that, because I think that's important. And we found out quite quickly that some other companies who were not like us, there were law firms that were infected. There were manufacturers of chocolate and medical companies that were infected. But that, again, is pretty much all we knew. So how do you take down a $50 billion company in 6 minutes? Well, here's the story. So the story goes back to 2012. And 2012 was when the National Security Agency of the United States, a government body of the United States, invented Eternal Blue, or discovered Eternal Blue and Eternal Romance, which are weaponized vulnerabilities. And they did this about 2012. Allegedly. Sometime after that, a chap called Harold Martin III either acquired or stole this code. A little unclear. He is in jail. He was from the same company as Edward Snowden, so it was a contract company. And a little further down the timeline, a hacker group called Shadow Brokers either stole or acquired the code from, or bought it, of Harold Martin III. And they tried to sell this. They tried to sell this code, but didn't have much success. Nobody wanted it. So they dumped it. They just dumped it and said, anyone want this code? Come and get it. So that was picked up by the North Koreans, and they made WannaCry in the same year, 2017. And in the UK, WannaCry was a very big event. It took down our National Health Service, working on these vulnerabilities. Now, quite separately, around about 2012, a guy called Ben Delpy, I think he's Belgium, invented Mimikatz. Now, this is technically not a attack code. It's used for penetration testing. It's a sort of penetration testing tool. And it steals your credentials. Still around, still used in common use. And what happened is a Russian military operation, referred to as Sandworm, is the moniker they're given, took these components and they combined the WannaCry vulnerability with Mimikat. and they created NotPetya. Now, NotPetya is the worst named virus in the world. Why is it called NotPetya? Because when it first came out, people thought it was an old virus called Petya. And then they decided, well, it really wasn't. So let's call it NotPetya. Now, this is very bad on many, many levels. Why is it bad? And I'll touch on this. This is a big cybersecurity event. It's a huge legal event. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is the importance of this aspect of a cyber attack. If it had been an old virus called Petya and Maersk had been infected with it, then we wouldn't have been doing our job very well, would we? And legally, that would put us in a poor position. If it was a brand new virus that nobody had seen before, then that puts us in a better position because we can actually claim from a legal point of view, it's an act of God. We couldn't relatively have seen it. And from a legal, this was really important. This stops people suing you. So it was really important. And of course, all the press was reporting, oh, Petya has infected Maersk. No, it's not Petya. It's not Petya. And it was driving us mad, but it's really the worst virus in the world. But why was it so deadly? So I want to talk about some of the technical aspects that made it so deadly. 6 minutes to take out a $50 billion company. So what were the aspects of NotPetya that caused it to take out the company this quickly? Well, it's quality tested code. This has been produced by the National Security Agency of the USA. They have spent considerable resource creating this attack code. It has been refined by the North Koreans. And then it turns up with the Russians. There has been a considerable amount of investment in this code. It is quality code. It also loves a flat network, and I'll talk about this in a bit more things. That's all worm-based attacks do. But particularly, it was good at destroying infrastructure. So it used the vulnerability, which is an SMB vulnerability, created by the National Security Agency of the USA and further enhanced by Mimikatz. This means that it is good at attacking unpatched machines, but it also can succeed where the majority of machines are patched. And that's important. So it has a number of ways of getting you. If the Eternal Blue doesn't get you, then the Mimikatz will. This is what it looks like. I'm not going to go through it in too much detail, but one, it drops some files, it processes and hash, it steals credentials, impersonates tokens, it propagates, it looks to spread itself, it executes itself, it hits the master boot record, and that's very damaging because it takes machines out completely. Now, you recall the message, it appeared to be ransomware. It was a ransomware message. But no, it wasn't. It was purely a destroyer. We know now that it was aimed at Ukraine, and most of Ukraine was taken down by this. Maersk was almost caught up to it by bad luck, and we'll talk about luck as we go through this presentation. But quite a sophisticated set of techniques. These are the techniques it uses. Encryption, remote services, masquerading, credential dumping. You get the point. This is quite a mature. I think there are 13 different attack methods within it. It's quite complex. It's quite difficult to work out. But at the time of the attack, we knew none of this. So what I'm telling you is a lot in respect. You think, oh, yeah, that's how it works. We had no clue. No clue whatsoever how it worked. It also uses valid Windows calls to spread itself. So basically, it escalates its privilege and then uses Microsoft calls to spread. Basically, is how it works. This is another view of it. Yeah, it's got a payload, and it said, it can work in situations where it's encountering patch machines and non-patch machines, but generally attacks the master boot record with some vengeance. That's how it works. But why is this such an issue? So déjà vu. So the vulnerability, as you'll know from the Romance vulnerability, was addressable in March by a piece of code from Microsoft that fixed it, because WannaCry was a big event. And actually at Maersk, we took WannaCry very, very seriously. We did an awful lot of patching. We actually patched the ships. Now, ships, and I'm not going to talk too much about ships, ships are floating computers. If you think that the helmsman steers a ship with a helm and there's a series of chains back to the rudder, no. He's altering a computer, and the computer is talking to another computer, the other computer is talking to an actuator, the actuator is turning the rudder. Okay? That is a computer on the sea. Maersk ships are also internet-enabled. They are visible on the internet, and have been for some time. So it is a hackable computer on the sea. So when WannaCry came along, we actually took this very seriously, and we patched the ships. It's quite hard to patch a ship, because you've got to find it first. It's usually at sea. Then you've got to get it in port, and try not to disturb it, and try not to get in the way when it's taking all these containers off, which is very dangerous if you're underneath a 40-ton container. So it's quite a difficult thing to do, but we took that very seriously. So we were actually quite annoyed that all our hard work had meant we hadn't succeeded in stopping something that should have been stoppable. So what went wrong? Well, multinationals went wrong. So Maersk is a huge multinational, but it's not unique. There are many companies like Maersk. I've worked for a number of them. It's not that too similar to Unilever. It's actually very like an airline. Genuinely, Maersk benchmarks itself against other airlines because it's such like an airline. But this is what they look like. So we had 90,000 employees over 110 countries. We had 50,000 endpoints, roughly. I'll come to that. So what does patching look like? So for a big corporate, 95% patched is a fairly good day. Right, so we're 95, it's patch Tuesday, whatever. Okay, we're 95% patched. So that's a good day. Still means we have 2,500 unpatched machines on our flat network. 98% is a wonderful day. To be patched at 98% for a big corporate is really good. You'll get a bonus. But that still means you've got 1,000 machines on your flat network that are unpatched. And of course, the goal is 100%, but anybody that tells you they are 100% is telling you one big fat lie. Do not believe them. For a multinational, that is not possible. For a small business of 5 PCs, maybe, but not for a multinational. And why? Because multinationals are very dynamic. They change all the time. When I was at Unilever, every 2 weeks, somewhere across the world, we opened or shut a factory every 2 weeks. I couldn't keep up. This is how dynamic they are. Maersk likes to acquire companies. You know, you've got everything under control and you've patched nearly 99%. And then we bought another company. Oh, well, how's their patching? Well, not very good. That's the sort of thing you have to face with one of these big companies. Really, really dynamic, and it's really, really hard. Patching is boring at the best of times. But to do it successfully for a big company is very, very hard. And 98% is good. And this is how much they change. You can't read this. I hate it when people put up slides so you can't read. This is to illustrate something. This is a list of companies that Maersk owns. There are 17 pages of it. Okay? These are all proper companies that are active. How on earth can you manage assets across 17 pages of company? You just can't do it. and it is not unique to Maersk. If you operate in a number of countries, 100 countries, you're going to have at least 100 companies set up just for illegal reasons. And they all have their own control. Some of them you don't fully control, but they're still on your network. This is what a big corporate multinational looks like, and this is why it's so hard. Because you can't patch fully. You have no idea how many assets you have. One of the most common questions that we asked ourselves during the recovery from this incident is, how many countries do we operate in? Nobody really knew. And it was really, really hard to ask people because we didn't have phones. We had mobile phones, but curiously, all the mobile contacts were lost. So it was really hard to actually talk to people. So we couldn't ask people. So we thought it was about 110. We were roughly right. I think it was 115 at the end. But you don't know. This is what a big company looks like. And it's over 9 separate, independent, autonomous business units. You had Maersk Line, which was the shipper. You had Maersk Oil, which produced oil. Still on our network. But how can I manage assets across it? It's really, really difficult to do. And let's talk about flat networks. Because we all know a flat network is not necessarily a good thing. So why do companies have them? Well, one, because they're cheap. Now, Maersk is in the business of shifting boxes from there to there. Mostly. Sometimes they don't quite turn up. But generally, that's generally the point of Maersk. And that is the definition of a commodity business, right? There is no money in it. It's really hard to make money because you've got to buy ships. Do you know how much one of those ships costs? And we've got 700. And we've got to make the money back by shipping your pile of, of plastic tat from China to here. And don't underestimate that. Almost everything you are wearing came on a ship. Everything you drive came on a ship at some stage within its life. So the stats are 90% of manufactured goods spent some time on a ship. It's really core to the global economy. But it's commodity. You don't make money out of it. So of course you're going to have a flat network. It's cheap. It's easier because you want a single help desk to help all your users across the globe. And it's going to be best if they have a flat network, because otherwise they have to hop over network segments and log in a lot. And you want that to be a cheap thing that you've outsourced, so it doesn't cost you any money. So big companies know flat networks aren't the best thing to have, but they're cheap. And at the end of the day, this is a risk business. Cybersecurity is a risk business. They want to make money. If they're not making money, they're out of business anyway. So this is why companies take this thing. So it's fairly common. Now, we had a brand new facility at Maidenhead. It was lovely. We had a lovely big room for it was going to be the SOC. We hadn't got round to putting the SOC in yet. But we had a NOC, a network operating center there. That was the first thing to go. You went in there and all the screens in the NOC were showing that ransomware message. You think, oh, yeah. But yeah, because it's a flat network. Now, we'll come back to the ships. I'll talk more about the ships a bit. The ships actually were on a separate network. And that's important. And we'll talk a little bit more about the ships as we go through. So that's why NotPetya was so deadly to Maersk and other multinationals. Don't forget, so Mondelez went down. Merck, who interestingly have just had their cyber insurance claim approved 5 years after the event. That's great. I mean, if I had an accident in my car and said, well, we'll give you the money back 5 years later. That's maybe. Yeah, and that's how cyber insurance is working. So big companies had that because they had similar characteristics. This is a characteristic of a multinational. But I haven't talked about the clever bit. So we've talked about, yep, it's well-written malware. But this is the clever bit. So this is what the Russian, which is seen as a military group, Sandworm, did. they came up with NotPetya, but then they thought, well, what should we do with it? So there's a company called Linkos Group, and they manufacture its accounting software. It's really dull, quite dull. They're Ukrainian, and in Ukraine, if you do business in the Ukraine, you have to return your tax electronically to the government. That's the law. So this this was the market leader in that sort of software. It was very, very common. It was a chunky old thing. So it was a client server. It sat on our network in our Ukraine office. So it had a server and it had some workstations off it. Now, like every good bit of software, we like it to do updates. We like Microsoft to update itself. We're fairly used to that now. This had a mechanism to update its security profile from its parent company. We like that. That's a good thing. That means it'll be updated. But what the Sandworm group did, they infiltrated Linkos Group and dropped NotPetya into the update for Medocs. So when it came to update time, the server took the infected update from the parent company, which I think is clever because there's no firewall involved. It was allowed to do this. It also had a good start in life because this is a server, so it's relatively privileged. It's a local server, so it's not in our main data center. So maybe it is not administered as closely as some of our other stuff, but it's not a bad start for malware to kick off. Gives it a good start. So I think that was the clever bit. All the other stuff is nice and clever, but this was good thinking. This is how you would do it. And let me tell you, this is not unique to Maersk. Many companies have this sort of arrangement. It's often to do with treasury things. They'll have actually a treasury server, which is not their server. It's linked to somebody else, but needs to sit on their network. And again, for a big company, pragmatism. If you're working for a big company, you have to have a pragmatic attitude that says, that's okay. It's going to update. I think we're okay with that. And that's why it was such a clever choice. That's the clever bit. This is the MITRE framework for NotPetya. Again, just to say it exists. I think the interesting thing here, if you look at the initial access, it's not classed as a supply chain compromise. I think this is a supply chain compromise because of that clever bit. Works on supply chains. That's not actually documented in the MITRE reference. But what does it do? So it's a destroyer. It chomps through your network. It destroys PCs, so it just encrypts the master boot record. It encrypts Windows servers. It looks for online backups. It'll take those out. It looks for things like phone, anything Windows, it'll kill. Just dead. To the fact it's not usable. It's a brick. And indeed, at one stage, we were actually just piling up laptops as bricks in the office, in the corridors, because they were just so useless. They were just stacks and stacks and stacks of them, just doing nothing. But the thing that really was quite harmful is the infrastructure service. And particularly, our good friend, Active Directory. Now, as we know, Active Directory, I always think of this as like your telephone directory. It's the telephone directory for your network, so it knows who's calling and who you call. And without it, it's not much point in having a network because nobody can make use of it. So Active Directory sort of makes everything work within a big corporate. It reflects directly your organizational structure, so it's sort of quite particular to you. But also constantly changes. And record what I said about dynamic organizations. Organizations are dynamic, therefore your Active Directory forest is constantly changing. It is replicated over multiple domain controllers, and that's good because it means you don't need to take a backup. Because it's always up to date, and if one goes over, it just replicates. So you don't need to take a backup. We'll come back to that. But it's generally seen as quite resilient. And most big companies have this or an equivalent. It just makes everything work. Without it, nothing works. You might have a network, but it's no good to you. So quite an important thing. And this is what it destroyed. And that's why it was so deadly. Because you can deal with things that are not working like your PC or a laptop. But when you have broken infrastructure, and this is down at the infrastructure level, when you have broken infrastructure, it's very hard. Because to recreate it for a $50 billion company with 90,000 employees over 110 countries is a bit of a tall order. And that was one of the real problems that we have. But what did it look like? What did it look like from the business point of view? And that's the important thing. I mean, the IT stuff is probably the interesting thing, but what did the business look like? 2,500 systems down. Over 9 separate businesses. $50 billion company. 50,000 endpoints were trashed, and indeed we stacked them up as bricks because that was how useful they were. We had our online backups were corrupted or not available, which was a little bit of an issue. We sent most operational staff home. So we sent tens of thousands of people home. And that became an issue, and we'll talk about that as we get through the presentation. 35 port terminals were closed. Now, port terminal, you know what a port is, when a ship's going. A terminal is one of the docks, right? So Maersk owns many, many terminals. But big terminals, things like Mumbai, Los Angeles. So can you imagine? We recall what happened where the big ship Evergreen, was it, got caught in the Suez Canal? That caused chaos. Can you imagine what happens when you shut ports? Because 90% of manufactured goods are going around on these ships. They're part of other organizations' just-in-time processes. It all grinds to a halt. So we actually closed 35 ports. Port terminals, technically, but effectively, you're closing a port. And why was that? Because the software that was running the cranes had been infected. So the cranes couldn't work. And these are dangerous places, right? So if a crane is not working right, you don't want to be anywhere near it because it's got 40 tons of container above your head. So this is dangerous stuff. We actually had reduced sailings. Now, one of the first questions that was asked very, very correctly by the board when we had this cyber attack is everybody safe? Not are the systems down, is everybody safe? And that's really important because Maersk is about running ships. Now, those ships are quite large. They're 500,000 metric tons. They move at about 25 knots. And if they're out of control, that's dangerous. So one of the very first things is, what is the status of the ships and the people on them? Because that's really, really important. As I said, the ships were on a separate network component, so actually were not infected. But they didn't have the support of any of the other systems to make them work. Because Maersk had an older population of captains, they sort of knew how to operate ships from the era when we didn't have all these systems. So they could actually have some vestige of business going into port, because they knew how to do it. They didn't have all the things they needed, and we couldn't load up new ships or take new bookings, but the existing ships that were floating, they could take into port and get some of the stuff off. And that was really important, because it gave a semblance of business continuing. And that's really important because it gives you hope. And one of the other things that goes through your mind, and we'll come back to this, is $50 billion company is stopped, right? They're not meant to stop, right? All the IT is down. It's not meant to happen like that. Is it recoverable? I wasn't sure. So have some semblance of hope that, oh, we're doing a bit of business. That's good. There is hope at the end. And that was really, really important. At that moment, at 11:15 on that date in June, 15% of world trade stopped. That's actually quite important. 15% of world trade. Quite important. At that point, we breached almost every bit of regulation or legislation you could do, right? In as many countries as you could, right? I think we must hold the record for breaching the most data breaches ever, simultaneously. It's probably a Guinness World Record. But yeah, you will have naturally breached regulation in every country. And the consequence of that is every regulator in the world suddenly wants to talk to you. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a bit busy. Because it's got worldwide press attention. It was on Twitter quite quickly, but the world knows about it very, very quickly. And all the law enforcement. So it's not the regulators wanted to come and see you. Every law enforcement body in every country, 110 countries we operate in, also would like to see you. Oh, sorry, a bit busy. But this is what you get, and it suddenly becomes very, very chaotic. And what does it feel like? It feels like this. This is what it feels like. It feels like you've gone back to the 1950s and people will get their typewriter out, because that's the sort of technology stage you're at. It's complete chaos. You really don't know. It's very disrupted. It's very, it affects people quite deeply. We had people that actually quit during the event because they couldn't cope with it. It's very, very traumatic for people. We were running the company on pen and paper, literally. One of the things I recall now, so the office was probably about the floor, a bit more floor space than we have here. But one of the floors was, it had walls you can write on. So all the walls were meant to be written on. And after about a week of the recovery, I went into this one floor space, and around all the walls, it was a manual intranet. People, because you couldn't get any, there was no intranet, you couldn't get any information. People had actually written down, here is a list of server names, here is the phone directory over here, and they'd written it on the walls. That's what we've become. Really, really difficult, and really, really traumatic. Was a traumatic event. So how did we recover? And what are the things we did on the long road to recovery? So Maersk was down proper for about 2 or 3 weeks with almost nothing. I would say 2 months we had a semblance of IT, 3 months a workable IT, 6 to 9 months to be fully recovered. But what are the things that are important on there? So here are some of your new best friends. Luck, right? So this is the Lagos connection. So you have no directory services. You have no backup because we knew you didn't need one because it was very resilient and replicated itself. And you've got no servers to run it on. So do you, and here is the participation question, do you start from scratch? Recreate an Active Directory from scratch without any documentation, by the way, because all the documentation was electronic. So you really got to start from scratch with pen and paper for 90,000 employees over 110 countries. Do you really want to do that? Have a nice lie down, or C, get lucky? And you'll have guessed the correct answer is C, get lucky. So we found out that one domain controller in Lagos had been off due to local power outages. Good, because we had some assurance that had not been affected by the incident. So we imaged it, and we put the image in somebody's pocket, and they flew them from Nigeria to the UK with that image on. And we used that to seed the Active Directory. And it was good for many points. One, because it gave you hope. You're looking in these incidents for little vestiges of hope. Hope. Something has gone well for us. That's lucky. We feel good. We feel motivated in recovery. That's what you can do. So that was a genuine story. It was genuinely useful. but like all good stories, is not quite true. It's mostly true. Directory services were restored by a combination of luck, so we did use this to get started with our Active Directory. Hard work, we had Microsoft on site. They did a lot of good work in recreating an Active Directory instance for them. But also the hive mind, it was a group effort in that we had 3 other options to actually recover our Active Directory. But also caution, and I'll come back to caution. One of the things you're really, I can only say for me, I was really paranoid about was reinfection. Because now you've been working probably about 8 to 10 days and really working, Elon Musk style working, shall we say. But people have been in the office 18 hours a day, haven't really been home, and this is all they're thinking about to the exclusion of anything else. And you're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. But what if we got reinfected? What would that look like? That would really kill us, because all the energy we'd expended, you couldn't ask people to do it again. It's the Groundhog Day. And we were very cautious because of this. A bit of Latin for you. This is Manuel from Fawlty Towers, who, as you knew, very famous episode, he knew nothing. This is Socrates. I know that I know nothing. Even at that point, very little was known about this. And as you try to recover it, you're doing it almost blind. On day 1, we knew sort of what this thing could do to a company. That was it. That's all we knew. But yet we were the second most knowledgeable people about it, apart from the attackers. And it takes a while for people to analyze the code and actually say, well, this is what it's really doing. So I've shown you how it really works. We didn't know any of that. So you're very, very cautious. We thought, could it be reinfecting? Could we have a scenario where we get so far and we put back Active Directory and we get it all over again? That would really kill us. So you really do think about that sort of thing, because generally you're working blind. But luck plays a part. So, and this has been worrying me, this for a while now. Timing. This is a meme taken from the internet. It says, in case of cyber attack, break glass and pull cables. And everyone thinks that's quite funny. But is it? And this has been bothering me. So this is my second question. Do we know how fast a network-based cybersecurity attack travels across a multinational corporate? So we're going to go for a show of hands, okay? Who thinks it's A, the speed of light? Or 1, 2, 3, okay, wrong. Speed of electricity. Anyone? No? Speed of electricity is 80% of the speed of light. C, speed of the network. Yeah, quite a few. I think this is not a bad response, actually. Speed of sound? Just put there for fun. Yeah, speed of sound, yeah, you never know. E, no idea. Yes, you're with me now. The correct answer is E. There is almost no research on this. Nobody really knows. But when you're in an attack situation, it might be important. And this has been bothering me for some time, because this is what the malware has to get through. This is a fairly simple network, actually, but your network is probably much more complex than that, but it's got to get through all this stuff. It's got to replicate, it's got to actually attack, it's got to replicate, it's got to steal the credentials, it's got to look at some shares, see if it can replicate, and starts replicating across this sort of infrastructure. And it's going to count some boundaries, it might see a network segmentation, might not, and different types of machine. This is quite complex, there's a lot of work for it to do, but yet nobody really knows how quickly it does it. And we know NotPetya actually had a timing element. If you look at the write-up, it does have the timing element. It does actually wait for a few minutes. There was also some suggestion that actually there's a 3-day timing delay on it. which came up quite, I actually think it wasn't there, but this was a rumor that went round in the early days where people were analysing. It said, oh, it infects you, then waits for 3 days. And that was really important to us. So when we came to recovering our data, we actually think, where is our clean data? If we go back to the data that we've recovered and it's infected because it was waiting for 3 days, we will get this repeat infection. So we actually lost 3 days good data purposely because we didn't want to risk picking up bad infected data. And we know, NotPetya for Maersk anyway, took out 60 countries in 6 minutes and took 90 minutes to get round most of the network. So, is pull the cables, and people did, let me assure you, if people think something's infected, they will literally pull the cable out of the back of the machine. It makes them feel good. It does. Is it a valid defensive strategy? So you're in the UK, you're a global provider, you've seen a big malware outbreak. Can you phone Australia and say, disconnect? That'll save you. You might have the time to do it, so it might be a valid defensive strategy. And here's the mathematics, which I've gone through at great expense with my slide rule. But if you actually look it back, so the rate of destruction for NotPetya was 9 devices per second, based on the stats I've given you. And that means it travelled at an average speed of 7,241 meters per second, which is about the speed of the space shuttle. By the way, who took that picture? How do you take the picture of that? I don't know. There we go. Which takes 90 minutes to get around the world. So that might mean you have 90 minutes of grace. Now, if that is true, and there is no research to back up that, this is not university standard research, let me assure you, but there is none of it. If you knew that, you might design your systems differently. You might move away from the great big data center concentration. Say, this is a really important system. It needs to be hugely resilient to attack. We'll actually have it so it can stand on its own. And if we get an attack, I'll phone up Australia and say, disconnect, carry on as usual, just don't connect to the network, and you can be good. I don't know. That's just been bothering me for a bit. And there's almost no research on it. And your last best friend, a nice cup of tea. And I'm British, so we like our tea. You have about 50 people that can fix this. The cybersecurity team are generally not any of those people. So it's an interesting question. What does a cybersecurity function team do during an attack of this nature? Lots is the answer, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But only a handful of people can actually fix it. So what does everybody else do? So many non-technical people rebuilt laptops. As we were getting into the recovery stage, we had a factory process to rebuild laptops, 50,000 laptops. We did it in a couple of weeks because we had factories around the world. They had a set process, and this was non-technical people rebuilding the laptops and desktops. Many, many people worked outside their normal role. About a month before the incident, Maersk had a major reorganization. Many people were in a new role, so they all fell back to that old role where they could add most value. Some people bought third-party software. Fine. Most people use their home computers, phones, and WhatsApp. And that has benefits and dangers, and we'll talk about that. But people wanted to help. We sent most people home, and after 2 weeks, they were fed up of this, and they were also quite depressed that they weren't helping. So they wanted to help in any way they could bring back the company. Now, they weren't technical people, but they did. So you'll spot some washing here. In the UK, the UK setup was the IT folks and the tax folks. So there was a tax function within the UK. The tax function had been sent home for 2 weeks. They phoned us up and said, what can we do? We feel really bad that we're not helping. What we can do to help the company come back? And we said, we've got about 100 IT people who haven't really done their laundry for a week. You couldn't do the laundry, could you? And they generally did the laundry. Because they felt they wanted to help. Some people rose to the occasion. Now, the point about this, the people you would guess would be good in a crisis weren't. And the people you thought wouldn't be good in a crisis were. And you'd never guess it. You'd guess wrong. That's one of the learnings from it. Some people quit because it was very stressful. They quit during the event. Most people didn't, but they did. So, some technical challenges we faced. So we're starting with the recovery now. We're getting Active Directory down. We've recovered that. We're starting to recover machines. We are capable of bringing back one system out of 2,500 across 9 major bits of business. Which system would you like back? Oh, don't know. Nobody had ever thought of it. And the board were really reluctant to make that call. In actual fact, the CIO challenged them and said, well, if you can't make that one call, we're going to stop the recovery because there's no point. So which 8 bits of business are you going to sacrifice? And which one do you want back? How do you resync the data? Because don't forget, we had some ships still sailing. They were doing a bit of business. People had bought third-party software, and they were actually making sales on it. But that was unrecorded. So how do you resync the data? Because your systems are going to start to come back, not necessarily in the order you want them. And your data is going to be all out of sync. So how do you sync that back? How do you roll out things in days rather than months? We got quite good at that, and that was one of the dangers. Said, well, you can do that for a short period of time, but you can't do it long term. We rolled out a new version of Windows within about 10 days, but that would have taken us a year. But you can't do that all the time. What about your legacy? The legacy is often applies to the older stuff, but it's the core of your business. It's stuff that really makes stuff work. And a lot of it still worked. It was mainframe. So it was still working, but nobody could get to it. But it's been down for 3 weeks, done nothing for 3 weeks. What's the status of that? I've talked about our clean restore point. We actually moved back 3 days because we didn't want to take the risk. We had a number of occasions when we bring out the system said, does anybody know what this system does? Nope. Do we want to bring it back? Nope. And that's with a company that's, Maersk is 100 plus years old. It's been in IT forever. It'll have these systems that nobody really knows what they do. But the thing that we worried about was the groundhog infection. And this is one of the things that caught us out with WhatsApp. So we were using WhatsApp because we didn't have anything else. And we were getting to a stage where we were getting momentum with our recovery. And then a rumor went round on WhatsApp that we'd been reinfected. The rumor was untrue. Like almost every rumor on social media, it was untrue. But that, people went round and pulled cables again. That took us back about 2 days, and it's almost impossible to kill a rumor on social media. Really, really difficult. So if you live by social media, you'll die by it. So a lot of worries about that. So what do we learn from the occasion? So I've talked about the fact it wasn't ransomware. We found that out quite quickly. So we didn't have to worry about the payment of the ransom things. Maersk would never have paid a ransom. And I'm pretty anti it myself. It doesn't make sense. But even so, even though we knew it wasn't ransomware, we still had several instances of people contacting Maersk pretending to be the attackers, saying, give us money and we'll give you the keys, even though it wasn't ransomware. We knew some peers were infected. That wasn't that useful to us. Made us feel a bit better because it wasn't just us. But we didn't get much information. But this was a pivotal point for third-party relationships. So we had a lot of people in. We had Deloitte's in. We had IBM in. And some people, some third parties that we worked with rose to the occasion and some didn't. And Maersk will probably remember those for the next 15 years. So it was a pivotal point for third-party relationships. Hygiene, it's dull. Cyber hygiene is so dull, but just needs to be world class. 98% is not good enough. And I know it's difficult, and I've been there. It's just, you just have to strive to perfection with patching, asset management, and backup. And I'm saying to people, at the time of the attack, the value of the backup tape, and I know it wasn't actually a tape, certainly not a compact cassette, was $50 billion. Because without that, there was no company. Complacency. We had technology defenses. They failed very, very quickly. You saw 3 flags from nation states on that earlier slide. This is sophistication. They will walk through any piece of commercial technology you can buy, pretty much. Because they are nation states. They have almost unlimited resources. And there are 3 of them. This is, bless them, this is a report that was put out by the Danish intelligence service 2 months before the attack. And handily, they looked at the cyber threats against the maritime sector. They said, and I'll quote them, "The threat of destructive cyber attacks against the maritime sector is low," 2 months before the attack. To be fair to them, they're correct. It wasn't an attack on the maritime sector. But be very wary about intelligence. And experts. We had a lot of experts trying to help us. It wasn't useful. It was just a distraction. The thing that helped is assume the attacker is a lot smarter and better resourced than you. We certainly did that. And for Maersk, it's often quoted as a people-led recovery, and that's purely because we didn't have anything else. We just had people. But they really wanted to help. It was traumatic. You couldn't predict the behavior, but people are going to help you come back. And this is one of the things I haven't got time to talk about now, but digitization makes that harder. As you digitize companies, you take all the people knowledge and put it into computers. So if your computers are down, then the knowledge that knows how to get a ship into port without the paperwork is lost. And that's quite dangerous. So people are really, really important. Of course, we did forensics. That was a distraction. It was an expensive distraction. Why was it a distraction? Because we had to get to the core machine, which was in Ukraine, and get it and secure it to a legal standard and do our forensic to a legal standard so that we could go and sue Russia. Were we going to do that? No. Was it a waste of time? No, because we did learn some stuff. But it was very, very disruptive to the recovery. And I don't think it was worth it. We were operating with a lot of unknowns. As I said, we knew nothing, but we knew more than most people. And you just have to, and you are, because we were in the UK and our communications with the rest of Maersk were very poor for quite considerable time, you just have to make some assumptions, get comfortable with the unknowns. Because if you can't find the person in the building to make the decision, then you're making the decision. And you're taking a lot of decisions way above your pay grade. And that's actually one of the legal aspects of it as well. You'll be pushing technical barriers. Microsoft weren't sure we could recover that amount of data. And one of the other things I think was important that we did do is you have 50 people that can mend it, but everyone wants to ask them questions. So you need to give them some protection, cocoon them. So we actually formed a layer. It's one of the jobs the cybersecurity function did do. We almost insulated them from the noise so they could do the recovery. Because everybody's asking you questions all the time. When's my system back? When's my system back? And be comfortable that in this scenario, your perception of risk, and cybersecurity, in my opinion, is a risk game, your perception of risk turns 180 degrees. The things you're really uncomfortable with on a normal day, you're happy with here, because generally, you can't make things any worse. So be comfortable with that aspect of it. And it is a risk thing. So here is this is the Maersk annual report, and I'll just read a couple of words for it. So it says, Maersk is exposed to cybersecurity threats that could materially affect operations and the financial condition. Cyber attacks targeting systems or production facilities could result in severe business disruptions and significant losses. That's a reasonably good description of the NotPetya event. Except as you see, that was in the report prior to the event. So it's a known risk. And this is a really odd thing that the board are comfortable with signing off, particularly cybersecurity risks, very comfortable with signing them off, but yet they still don't want them to happen. But we said, here it is. It's the year before. It was published. This is what happened. Oh, we still didn't want it to happen. It's a really difficult thing to manage. And that was 5 years ago. And This week, we've got the cyber insurance case coming in from Merck. It's still going on. So have we learnt things? Are we okay with how robust the digital world is? We've seen a lot of stuff where it seems to be a bit fragile. We've seen problems with supply chain, and Maersk is pretty much supply chain. We see a lot of technology defenses. A sophisticated attack will walk through most of them. Are we still resilient to nation-state attacks? I don't know. If not, Petra happened again today. Would it happen the same way? Maybe. And I talked about the cyber hygiene, bringing the really boring stuff. Are we up to doing that to 99.9% patching? Or do we need to look to something else? Maybe it's not achievable. And are you clear what you do when 6 minutes gives you that? So I'm going to finish there. Thank you very much for your attention.